Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're tuning in. You may have noticed our title, very catchy. It reads Ferrari versus Tesla, high performance versus future ready. What is the difference between a Ferrari and a Tesla, Tirza, in the context of teams and organizations? What can we learn from these examples about high performance and future readiness?
Thanks so much, Helena. So we have this idea of a high performing team as kind of like the ideal, and high performance brings up the image of like a Ferrari, really finely tuned, finely engineered, lots of horsepower. And these are good things. Like we want our teams to be like have a lot of like momentum. We want to have teams that are effective and efficient. We want to have teams with nice, clean handoffs. But the challenge with that is finely tuned machines aren't can be very brittle, right? We change one thing a little bit, and they're not functioning as well. And they're no longer the fastest machines on at the racetrack. Teslas and electric vehicles have been beating gas-powered engines for years now, and that's because those companies that are moving technology forward and are future ready are actually looking toward the future and what's going to thrive in the future, whether that's um, technical constraints, legal constraints, carbon constraints, are the teams that are really going to thrive as we move forward. And so, when I think about the difference between high performing and future ready, high performing is a team that's working together right now. And future ready is one with the innovation and learning capacity to be thriving into to the future. And it's not an either or conversation, it's really a both and. We
Hmm.
want our teams to be working well together now, but we need teams that are continuously evolving into the future.
That's super challenging, right? Because we can't neglect where we're coming from. We come from an environment that required us to be high performing in these, matrixed organization, very hierarchical environments, clear processes, clear KPIs that were measured. So how do we manage that balance? How do we strike that balance between high performance and future readiness within our own teams when we make that shift from a matrixed organization into a networked organization?
Yeah, it's a great question because there is a certain amount of time that needs to be dedicated toward learning and innovation. And I'm no longer certain that this trade off means that we're going to lose output over time. As a friend of mine says, if you're busy, that just means you're bad at AI. And so, if we're taking time to really learn how to leverage our efficiency creating tools these days, it's entirely possible that the time spent learning is going to be well made up in terms of effectiveness of output. But we do need to be setting aside time for the learning loop of feedback, for the learning of new tools, and for the experimentation with new ways of doing things, as well as the exploration of new business models and new technology. So that is time that isn't spent directly toward output of our current business and business model. But if we're only focused on our current output, we're going to quickly fall behind in a world that's moving forward rapidly, both technically and business model change.
Mhm. What's the advice that you would give teams who are trying toward making this shift? They understand, oh, okay, we need these learning capacities. How do we now ask for the time to make to have that learning, that timeline, that space to
Mhm.
explore?
Mhm.
What advice would you give teams?
Yeah, I would advise leaders to be focusing on measuring for output and value, not for time spent, first of all, because it's entirely possible that the current output and the current value can be created with less time, but people will uh, allow the task to expand to fill the time available. And so, to really be finding a way to allocate and reward for time spent in learning and experimentation, while that doesn't necessarily mean dropping the expectations around output, but actually finding a way to reward people for being more efficient and effective in their jobs. A lot of places are really rewarding people directly around time spent on tasks rather than the value in the output. And if we begin to evolve our way of looking at what does it mean to be effective, and what does it mean to be creating value in an organization, and move away from a measurement of busyness and toward a measurement of value and output, I think we might find that, especially amongst our natural innovators, our natural explorers, they're going to be able to create the same output they've been doing while dedicating more time to learning. And learning and experimentation does tend to stir up a little bit of chaos. And so we need to have a pathway for new ideas to land, get de risked and validated before they're moved into any kind of customer facing output or integrated into our core business. And
Mhm.
so it's important that leaders are also dedicating the time toward understanding how they are learning to incorporate innovation into the business.
That's so interesting because that for me, I used to be in that kind of context. And I remember our leader saying, okay, you self organize. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know how, I know that you need to figure it out, but you need to organize yourselves around finding the answer that is, towards a more customer centric approach and not just coming up with it yourself. So, speaking to the whole experimental approach of dealing with complexity. And the challenge we faced was twofold. We had a lack of capacity within our own team to understand because we were used to receiving information, we were used to receiving decisions, right there. So there was like a hesitation to, okay, can I actually do this myself, or am I just being told we can self organize, but then if we lean too far into it we'll be slapped on the hand type of thing. And then
Mhm,
there was a lack of guidance in certain situations where we did actually need the leader to step in and help us make certain decisions that were challenging. And
mhm.
so from that perspective, what are key capacities that you need as a team to become future ready, and what are also key capacities as a leader who oversees a future ready team that they have to build in order to guide their teams through this? What would you say about that?
So, the great news is that um, innovation as a practice is pretty well developed. We actually have a whole process of best practices that are quite widely accepted about how to identify a problem, um, empathize with the person who's holding that problem, generate solutions, test solutions, validate solutions, and then bring them forward into our core business. So, what I would advise is that teams are actually spending time learning about and understanding the process of innovation. And I don't just mean brainstorming. Um, Coming up with ideas and the practice of creativity and looking at things from different perspectives is an important way of coming up with possible solutions, but it isn't how we go about validating them, improving them, or empathizing with the customer. So it's really vital that we're teaching our teams the process of innovation, and as a leader, that you're aware of what are the different outputs and mindsets required at each stage of innovation. And so it's useful that we are all learning all of these processes. Um, but even kind of behind innovation is really a process of kind of continuous feedback, of looking at what are we doing and what are we learning from what we're doing. And that process of continuous feedback is sometimes called becoming a deliberately developmental organization, where we are looking at continuously developing ourselves and our processes. And that comes from really both a growth mindset and a learning mindset. But even more importantly, developing the practice and capacities of feedback. Sometimes we have been given just really poor tools around feedback. We have this idea of the kind of feedback sandwich where we say something nice and then give constructive criticism and then say something else nice. This is actually like really just poor advice. And so, as a leader, it's really vital that you understand how to create psychological safety, how to give effective feedback and feed forward, and then ultimately how you are developing people on your team to be coming with that desire for learning and also the ability to give and receive feedback. Organizations that have done this so well are Pixar was really, really well known
Hmm.
for their process of what they called plussing, where every morning people would bring their work forward and they would ask for it to be plussed. And there were really fundamental roles of plussing. You needed to be able to be additive, like what else would you create here? What would you add to this? You were criticizing the work, not the person. Um, and you were keeping it in the like work being shown, not moving into the past or the future. And there are various other ways to like create the frame where we're all ready to put our work on the table and review the work. And that process of really separating the work from the person is a practice. And it isn't something that we're necessarily all well oriented for because we have come to identify ourselves with our output. And so we need to be developing a fresh practice of separating the work as the best that could be done by the people at the time and the process of improving that as a process of improving the work, not necessarily criticizing or trying to change the person.
So what I hear you say, I mean, it's a lot. There's a lot of change, right? It's like, how do people step into the future and develop the right skills and capacity? So there's an innovation process that is to be understood and learned, and time to learn that as well. There are continuous feedback mechanisms that come into this. So there are these learning capacities so that we
Mhm,
can have this up in continuous improvement of the person, but also of the process. And then
mhm,
there's this skill, this emotional intelligence skill, I want to call it. Maybe there's a better way of phrasing that, but on how to separate work from the person. And there are certain practices that can be done around that. And that is a lot, right? So if I'm a leader and I'm thinking, okay, I want to enable my team to step into the future, um, how do I create more space for learning? Where do I start teaching them the innovation skills? Do I start looking at into the process? How do I start getting people on board? How do I start managing that change? What is a good way to create momentum on
mhm.
all three of these or four of these dimensions that that you just mentioned that have to change?
That's a great question. So, um, I think we should never underestimate the amount that can be done in an hour, hour and a half a week. And so we build a lot of our programs around that simple, like hour, hour and a half a week, where we can come together and engage in conversation and learning. And so having like that time, which is if you're looking at coming back to office a day or two a week, this can be a great opportunity to come together and dedicate an hour of that to learning together. And I think it's really useful to first focus on the culture capacities. So, do we have the ability to create clarity and agreements and psychological safety and have good feedback conversations on the team? And once we have developed some of those foundational capacities, then we're more ready to move into an innovation process. If we try and move into an innovation process before we have these foundational cultural capacities, we're needing to move into a process where we can give and receive feedback both from within our team but also from our customers. But we yet haven't yet developed the kind of emotional intelligence, the scripts, and the like practices that we need in order to move into that type of work. So we can kind of think of this as 101 and 201. 101 is, do we have psychological safety on our team? Do we have an agreed upon practice about how we approach feedback or feed forward, which is looking just into the future? Um, do we have an agreed upon practice about how we create clarity and agreements? Once we have those, now we're in a much, much better place to learn how we are going to take those foundational skills and apply them to innovation. And I think that a lot of this, it sounds very daunting. It is a lot to tackle. But really, if we are dedicating even just an hour a week, Over a quarter, we can really address a lot of these cultural capacities. And over another quarter, we can address a lot of these innovation capacities. The time is going to pass anyway. And if we're using that just like continuous process of developing our teams, we can actually get a whole lot done. The challenge is our leaders are really like already underwater and not seeing how to do this or when to do this. And I really think that we can really find 1 hour a week, whether that's on a Friday as part of a retro or on a Wednesday when we all come into the office, to be dedicating to continuously improving our team and our innovation capacities together.
I think that's a great. Oh, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's really the leaders don't have the capacities, and then there's this sense of urgency. Well, okay, we're under pressure for profit. How can I possibly even give my teams this, a 2 month buffer to learn all of these things? Oh my God. And so by just creating 1 hour a week, for example, having team retrospectives, starting to learn what it means to give and take feedback. It's also a journey of, for me too, when I was leading the project of developing training for one of the portfolio items that we were building. And I was like, yeah, we need team retrospectives. And in my mind, because I understood what a team retrospective was, I inherently knew how to do them. And then
Mhm,
when you go through them, you're like, oh no, maybe I'm not that skilled at receiving feedback. Maybe I'm not that skilled at giving feedback. There's certain, so it is that learning process.
mhm,
And so starting really small and having a concrete tool that is pretty easy and it doesn't take too much time. It's really a great way to start practicing these
mhm,
skills that we need. Um, I had someone on the podcast, Susan Faust, and she was talking about how they were transforming their sales organization. And she also said that they started with a culture first approach and
mhm,
they started tackling culture first. And I was very surprised and impressed simultaneously because of this sense of urgency, people there's this lack of awareness of why should we start with culture. We have things to do, we have organizations to build, we have products that need to get launched and kicked out the door, so team, let's go. And so that awareness, and I'm not sure why, if it is that sense of urgency, maybe you've seen, you've had made other experiences, but why is it that there's this hesitation or reluctancy to starting with culture? What is that underlying fear that you could help leaders spot within themselves?
mhm. I think it's honestly just kind of a misdefinition of culture.
Mm,
I think oftentimes we think of culture as um, really about team building, exercises that are like building trust or goodwill on the team, or we think culture is about the social time. Um, but culture is really how we do things around here. And so it is ultimately how we are working together to drive forward our strategy. And um, and so there's the hesitancy to invest in it, I think, is a misunderstanding of what it actually is and how much of it is tied to moving our strategy forward. We can think about culture as kind of the tuning of our vehicle. We if we're driving especially a gas powered vehicle, we wouldn't hesitate to assume it needs to be tuned. If you've got misfiring among your spark plugs, the things are not like working very well and you can hear it. If you have a team without great cultural practices and capacities, the misfiring is going to happen. It's going to happen around kind of hiding, like covering up. It'll happen around poor work process. Like there's all kinds of ways that um, an underinvestment in culture shows up. But if we have a vehicle, we don't hesitate to go get it tuned up. We hesitate to invest in our culture, I think, from a lack of an understanding and appreciation of how much how we're doing things affects our outcome.
mhm,
And especially as things become increasingly ambiguous and technical change is requiring us to uh, approach our work fresh every day. Those ways of working together give us the how we are approaching the work together that we can lean on regardless of what the work is or what the ultimate outcome is we're working for.
Mhm.
So for leaders who are hesitant, I would have them look at what the cost is that they're currently paying for breakdowns in work process, breakdowns in agreements, breakdowns in decision making, delays in execution. Those types of things are really ultimately culture issues that haven't been resolved.
Hmm. That's a great thing to know because I mean, this was years ago. I was straight out of my master's studies, and we also was like in this team setup as well that where we were encouraged to be self-organized. And then someone said, well, we should probably figure out how we want to work together. And everyone was like, yeah, maybe, but shouldn't we talk about the features? Like we have, we have like a PI planning coming up, so we don't really have too much time. I think we should just start talking about, the actual product. And then another person was like, yeah, I think we should talk about how we collaborate, but what do we even talk about? Like,
Mhm.
okay, what we need to work together. And then everyone's like, oh yeah, we need to work together. And then everyone has a different understanding of what that actually means. And
Mhm.
there's not a whole bunch of people who understand what these capacities are and what to pay attention to. And so
Mhm.
for those out there, we're running out of time. We're not going to deep dive into all the capacities, but we have a Lumen program that is here, that helps us to develop these learning and collaboration capacities on teams so that you can drive this bottom up change and this and strike that balance between high performance and future readiness on your team. So give us reach out to us or check out our homepage, the culture program, collaboration and learnings program is called Creation Culture. Um, but I do want to ask you, Tirza, alongside that 1 hour retrospective that builds the learning capacities, you did touch upon the psychological safety aspect
Mhm.
as the 101. What's an easy practice within that? Let's just keep it within that example, within that team retrospective. What's a good way to foster psychological safety? What are the do's and what are the don'ts as well?
As a leader, I think there's two really key things. One is to ask for feedback. Ask for feedback in group settings and ask for feedback in one-on-ones. Ask your individual people how you could be supporting them in the team better, how you could be showing up better, and then ask the group how you could be showing up better. The next thing is to really look at how you are dealing with challenge. Uh, when people are challenging or they're coming up with ideas that you don't want to execute for whatever reason, um, if you are dealing with those in automatic shutdown or like a hard no, or launching into kind of a monologue of reasons, you're going to make it really certain that those people don't come to you with additional ideas. And anybody listening also isn't going to come to you with additional ideas. And so, how you deal with challenge, especially challenge that's coming in at an inappropriate time or suggesting bad ideas, is really going to determine the overall level of psychological safety. And so finding ways to greet challenge, especially that's either like ill-timed or ill thought through, in a way that acknowledges it, appreciates it, creates some space for it, and then sets it aside in a way that allows you to move on effectively. Um,
Mhm.
Rather than shutting it down, or launching into all the reasons it never should have happened in the first place. So, really taking a look, just to repeat, on asking for feedback and how you're dealing with challenge are some of the like key places to start. If you've managed to handle those, other ways are acknowledging contribution, and then really seeing an appropriate offering of feedback as a sign of care. Most learners these days are um, excited to get feedback. Most people in organizations really want some level of feedback. And if you're not providing feedback, they actually are experiencing kind of a lack of safety, because they don't know if you're going to tell them when they're off. And so finding
Mhm.
ways to incorporate small bits of appropriate feedback in a kind and safe manner lets people know that you've got their back. You're actually looking at their work, and you're looking at ways for the work to improve and for how they can improve their individual leadership.
Mhm. I love that. I love that so much. That really goes into this whole aspect that you're mentioning of what future ready teams are, continuous development of ourselves and the team, and as well as the process. So having those feedback, I feel like psychological safety and feedback goes hand in hand and is really at the core of being able to strike that balance between being able to shift into high performance, or being having to learn and adopt type of being able to shift gears, and at the core of that lies psychological safety and feedback. I don't know, is would
Mhm.
you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the real key of moving from just continuously delivering on the things we know how to do and we know how to do well to experimenting into the future is having the safety to explore, knowing that we're held in a container of care that's going to provide us appropriate feedback on how we can continuously improve, and that we can seek feedback from our customers and from our leaders is what allows us to continuously move and improve into the future.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you. This was very insightful for me, and I'm certain it was insightful for the community as well. If you have more questions, because I definitely wasn't able to touch upon all the questions, I'm sure you guys out there didn't had a bunch of questions as well that you would have wanted me to ask, shoot us a message. I'd love to hear your questions. Be very curious as to what you learned from this, and if you had additional ideas as well, and thoughts. Connect with us. And for now, I think we're gonna leave it with this. I thought it was really really great. A recap is focus on your innovation process skills, your innovation skills. Build continuous feedback practices and rituals within yourself, within your team, between among yourselves, and focus on continuous development of yourselves and the process, and that will allow you to strike this perfect balance between high performance and future readiness. So it's not either or, it's and. And with that, thank you so much, Tirza, for your time today and your insight as always. Very inspiring. And thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Everyone.